I still remember the exact texture of the couch cushion beneath my palm when I tried to stand up that night. Navy blue microfiber, worn soft in the center where we'd both claimed our usual spots over the past 2 years. I could still feel how my hands sank into it as I pushed myself up, already forming some half-joking retort about being a gracious winner, about how Jonah needed to learn to lose with dignity for once in his life. I had the controller in my other hand, still warm from where my fingers had been gripping it too hard during that final round. My thumb ached a little. I've been pressing the buttons with more force than necessary, the way I always did when Jonah was watching. When I could feel his attention fixed on me, like a spotlight, I pretended not to notice. But I didn't make it off the couch. His hand caught my wrist before I'd even straightened my legs. Not rough, but firm enough that my whole body went still. The kind of grip that didn't hurt, but made it clear he wasn't asking. My pulse jumped beneath his fingers, and I wondered if he could feel it, if he knew what that sudden contact did to the rhythm of my breathing. I'd spent 2 years teaching myself not to react when Jonah touched me during our games, during our arguments, during those moments when he'd shove my shoulder or grab my arm to emphasize some point he was making. I'd gotten good at it, good at pretending his hands on me meant nothing more than friendship, than familiarity. But this was different. "Sit down," he said. His voice had dropped lower than it had been just seconds earlier when he'd been accusing me of cheating, when we'd both been laughing and trading insults the way we always did. There was no laughter in it now, no edge of competition or playful antagonism. Just those 2 words, quiet and careful, like he was afraid of what would happen if he said them any louder. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since I'd won the game, since I'd thrown my hands up in victory and started talking about how he owed me $20 and his dignity. Jonah's face had changed. The grin was gone. His jaw was tight, that muscle near his ear flexing the way it did when he was trying to control something he didn't want me to see. His eyes held mine, dark and intent, and there was something in them I'd only glimpsed in fragments before, in moments I'd convinced myself I'd imagined. Something that looked almost like fear. Almost like what? My wrist felt hot where his skin touched mine. His thumb had found the hollow between the bones, resting there like it belonged, like he'd placed it with intention. Then it moved, just slightly, a slow brush across my pulse point that sent electricity up my arm and into my chest, making my heart stutter and restart. I didn't sit down right away. I stayed frozen in that half-standing position, caught between the momentum of leaving and the magnetic pull of his hand on my wrist, of his eyes refusing to let me go. The apartment was quiet around us. His roommate had gone home for the weekend. The TV screen had gone dark, the game over, waiting for one of us to restart it or choose something else. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and both of us breathing, too loud in the sudden stillness. I should have said something, should have made a joke, broken the tension the way I always did when things between us started to feel too heavy, too close to something neither of us had ever named. But my throat felt tight. The words I usually hid behind wouldn't come. Jonah's fingers shifted slightly, his grip loosening just enough that I could have pulled away if I'd wanted to. But he didn't let go. He was giving me a choice, I realized. He was holding on and hoping I wouldn't take it. So I sat down, slowly, my knees bent, my body sinking back into the cushion I'd been trying to escape. Jonah's hand stayed around my wrist the entire time, following the motion, adjusting his position so he could keep that contact unbroken. When I was seated again, closer to him now than I'd been during the game, close enough that our knees were almost touching, his thumb resumed that slow, deliberate movement against my skin. Back and forth, gentle, grounding me and unraveling me at the same time. He still hadn't looked away. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me like that. Whether he could see the 2 years of carefully constructed distance I'd built between what I felt and what I let him see. Whether he knew how many nights I'd gone home from his apartment and replayed every touch, every moment when his hand had found my shoulder or my arm or the back of my neck during some game or argument. Whether he'd noticed the way I never pulled away, even when I should have, even when staying close to him made my chest ache with everything I couldn't say. The argument we'd been having felt like it had happened in another lifetime. I couldn't even remember what we'd been fighting about. Something about the game, about rules and fairness, and who had actually won. It didn't matter anymore. We'd been arguing the way we always argued, that familiar dance of challenge and pushback that had defined our friendship since we'd met in a coffee shop during finals week our junior year of college. He'd asked if anyone was sitting at my table. I'd said yes, even though I was alone, just to see what he'd do. He'd sat down anyway, spread his books out across from mine, and told me I was a terrible liar. We've been doing this ever since. Testing each other, pushing boundaries, seeing who would back down first. Neither of us ever did. But this wasn't an argument anymore. This was something else entirely. Something that had been building beneath every competition, every teasing insult, every moment when our eyes met across a room and held for just a second too long. I'd felt it growing for months now, that charge in the air between us, that sense that we were both waiting for something neither of us knew how to start. Jonah's thumb stopped moving. His hand tightened around my wrist again, not forceful, just present, anchoring. His other hand rested on his own knee, fingers curled into a loose fist, like he was holding himself back from reaching for more of me. I realized, sitting there with my heartbeat pounding against his fingers, that the game had never been about winning. Not for either of us. Every challenge, every bet, every argument that started half serious and ended in laughter had just been an excuse, a reason to stay close, a way to keep coming back to each other without admitting why. And now Jonah had grabbed my wrist and told me to stay, and I had stayed, and we were both sitting in the wreckage of our own pretending. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. But something had shifted between us, something fundamental and irreversible. The distance we'd maintained had collapsed in the space of 2 words and 1 touch, and I didn't know what came next, but I knew with absolute certainty that nothing would be the same after this. His thumb moved again. Once. Twice. A question written in touch instead of words. And I didn't have an answer yet. But I also didn't pull away. I've always been the one who waits. The one who thinks before speaking, who measures responses, who keeps emotion locked behind careful words and careful distance. My friends used to joke about it in college, how I could sit through entire arguments without raising my voice, how nothing seemed to shake me. They didn't understand that it wasn't calmness. It was control. I learned early that showing what I felt only gave people power over me. So I stopped showing it. I became good at hiding, good at smiling when I wanted to scream, good at laughing when something cut too deep. Jonah was different from the first moment I met him. He didn't wait for anything. He moved through the world like he was always running towards something or away from it, restless in a way that made everyone around him feel too slow, too cautious. He turned conversations into debates, debates into competitions, everything into some challenge he needed to win. Not because he cared about being right, I realized eventually, but because sitting still with himself felt impossible. He needed the noise, the movement, the constant push and pull of testing boundaries. We shouldn't have worked as friends. Our rhythms were too different. I needed quiet to think. He needed chaos to breathe. But somehow, in that coffee shop 2 years ago, when he'd sat down across from me despite my lie about the seat being taken, something had clicked into place. He'd looked at me and grinned, sharp and knowing, and said I was a terrible liar. And I looked back and told him he was a terrible judge of character. And he'd laughed, really laughed, the kind of sound that made other people in the coffee shop look over, and I'd felt something in my chest unlock that I hadn't known was closed. After that, we kept finding each other. Same coffee shop, same corner table. He'd show up with his laptop and his restless energy, and I'd already be there with my books and my headphones, and we'd fall into our pattern. Him challenging me on whatever I was reading. Me deflecting with dry humor that only made him push harder. Both of us pretending we hadn't been hoping the other would show up. When he asked for my number, he framed it as a competition. Said he bet he could text me something that would make me laugh within 5 minutes. I told him that was impossible. He did it in 3. After that, the texts never stopped. Neither did the bets, the dares, the constant back and forth that felt like fighting, except neither of us was ever actually angry. I started going to his apartment for game nights about 6 months into our friendship. He lived with a rotating cast of roommates who were never around when I visited, like Jonah had somehow orchestrated our time together without ever saying that's what he wanted. We'd sit on that navy blue couch, controllers in hand, and spend hours locked in competition. Fighting games, racing games, anything with a clear winner and loser. He'd celebrate his victories with exaggerated triumph, jumping up, doing victory dances that were more mockery than joy. I'd accept my losses with calculated calm, already planning how to beat him next time. But the games themselves stopped mattering somewhere along the way. What mattered was the space between rounds. The moments when he'd lean into my shoulder to point at something on screen. When his knee would press against mine and stay there. When he'd grab my arm to emphasize a point and his hand would linger just slightly too long before pulling away. I told myself I was imagining the weight of those touches, the intention behind them. I told myself a lot of things about Jonah that I knew weren't true. He hid behind his competitiveness the way I hid behind my composure. Every challenge was a shield. Every argument a way to stay close without admitting why proximity mattered. I recognized it because I was doing the same thing, using our friendship as cover for something neither of us had the courage to name. We'd built this whole structure of games and bets and constant testing, and somewhere underneath, it was the truth we were both avoiding. That he affected me in ways I couldn't control. That his moods shifted mine even when I pretended they didn't. That I measure my days by whether I'd see him, hear from him, get to sit on that couch beside him, and pretend the electric current running between us was just friendship. I was 22 and had spent most of my life believing I was patient enough to wait for anything. But with Jonah, patience felt like cowardice. Like I was waiting for him to be brave enough for both of us. Waiting for a sign clear enough that I couldn't misread it, couldn't convince myself I was seeing something that wasn't there. And then he grabbed my wrist, told me to sit down in that quiet, careful voice, brushed his thumb across my pulse like he was reading my heartbeat, learning the truth my face wouldn't tell. The game had ended, but I didn't know yet what would begin in its place, or whether either of us knew how to stop hiding long enough to find out. The next morning, he texted me before I'd even gotten out of bed. "You looked scared when I told you to sit down." I stared at the message for a long time, my phone warm in my hand, sunlight cutting across my bedroom floor. Scared wasn't the right word. Terrified, maybe. Hopeful. Confused. All of those things tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate one feeling from another. But I wasn't going to tell him that. Wasn't going to hand him that kind of power when I still didn't understand what had happened between us, what that moment on his couch had meant. I typed back, "You're impossible," and left it at that. His response came immediately. 3 laughing emojis. Nothing else. Like we were back to normal. Like his hand hadn't been wrapped around my wrist for what felt like hours. Like his thumb hadn't traced patterns against my skin that I could still feel even now, 12 hours later. I wanted to ask him what he'd meant by it. Why he'd stopped me from leaving. Why he'd touched me like that, gentle and deliberate, and completely unlike every casual touch that had come before it. But I couldn't find the words that wouldn't expose everything I'd been hiding. So I said nothing. Let the conversation drift back into our usual rhythm of sarcasm and challenges and everything that felt safe. But I couldn't stop replaying the moment. It followed me through my entire day. The pressure of his fingers around my wrist. The way his voice had dropped when he'd told me to sit down, not asking, not demanding, something in between. Almost like a plea. Like he needed me to stay more than he'd needed to win whatever game we'd been playing. I turned it over and over in my mind, examining it from every angle, trying to decode what it meant, whether I'd imagined the weight of it. That night, he asked if I wanted to come over. Said his roommate was gone again. Said he'd just gotten a new game. Said he needed someone to beat. The invitation was casual. Normal. Exactly like dozens of other nights we'd spent together. I told myself it would be fine. That whatever had shifted between us the night before had probably been nothing. A moment of weirdness we'd both pretend hadn't happened. I told myself I wanted things to go back to normal, even though the thought of sitting on that couch and pretending my skin didn't remember his touch made my chest ache. I went anyway. The apartment looked the same, smelled the same, like the sandalwood candle his roommate always burned and the faint staleness of a place where 2 young men lived without quite enough attention to cleaning. Jonah answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt that had seen better days, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He grinned at me, that familiar sharp grin that always felt like a challenge, and stepped aside to let me in. We fell into the usual routine, grabbed drinks from the kitchen, settled onto the couch in our respective spots, controllers in hand. Started the game. The competition picked up immediately, that familiar back and forth of trash talk and laughter, and neither of us willing to give an inch. I won the first round. Beat him cleanly, no controversy, no question. I felt that surge of satisfaction I always felt when I managed to best him at something, that small victory that mattered more than it should. I set down my controller and started to stand, already forming some comment about his declining skills, about how maybe he should practice more instead of just talking. His hand caught my wrist, the exact same way as the night before. Firm, but not forceful. Grounding. My whole body went still, that same electric current running up my arm and into my chest, making my heart stutter. But this time his grip was gentler, more careful, like he'd spent the past 24 hours thinking about how he'd touched me, adjusting, testing. His fingers settled around my wrist with a tenderness that made my throat tight. "Don't go," he said. His voice was quiet, uncertain in a way Jonah never was. "Sit here." I looked at him. His eyes were fixed on where his hand met my skin, like he couldn't quite believe he was doing this again, like he was waiting for me to pull away and laugh it off and break whatever spell we were both caught in. I sat down, didn't even hesitate this time. Just let my body sink back into the cushion beside him, closer than before, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His hand stayed on my wrist. His thumb found that same spot over my pulse, pressed there lightly, feeling the rapid beat of my heart against his skin. He had to know what he was doing to me, had to feel the way my breathing had changed, gone shallow and uneven. We sat like that in the quiet, the game forgotten, the TV screen glowing in front of us, waiting for someone to restart the match. But neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. His thumb traced that slow, deliberate circle against my pulse point, and I wondered if this was his way of asking a question he didn't know how to voice. If he was waiting for me to give him an answer I didn't know how to form. All I knew was that I wasn't leaving. Not while his hand was on my wrist. Not while he was looking at me like I was something precious and terrifying at the same time. Not while there was still a chance this meant what I desperately hoped it meant. It became a pattern after that. A ritual neither of us acknowledged, but both of us expected. Jonah would text me. I would come over. We would play games, make bets, argue over rules and strategies, and who was actually better at whatever challenge he'd invented that night. And every single time when I moved to stand, when I tried to leave or shift away or create any distance between us, his hand would find my wrist. At first, I told myself it was about control, that this was just another way for Jonah to compete, to assert some kind of dominance in our ongoing war of wills. He hated losing. Hated even more the idea that I might walk away while he still had something to prove. So he kept me there, kept me close, used that grip on my wrist like an anchor. But that explanation fell apart a little more each time it happened, because the grip grew softer, more careful. What had started as firm and grounding became gentle, almost reverent. His fingers would settle around my wrist like I was something fragile he was afraid of breaking. His thumb would find my pulse point with increasing precision, like he'd memorized exactly where to touch, exactly how much pressure to apply to make my breath catch. And the way he looked at me when he did it changed too. That sharp, competitive edge faded from his eyes, replaced by something vulnerable and uncertain. Something that looked almost like fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what he was doing, what he was asking for without words. I started paying attention to the details. The small things that revealed this was more than just Jonah being Jonah, more than his usual need to win every interaction. Like how his hand would tremble slightly before making contact, how he'd take a breath like he was gathering courage, how he never grabbed my other wrist, never touched my arm or shoulder the way he had before. It was always the same wrist, always the same gentle pressure, always followed by that slow movement of his thumb against my skin. One night, 3 weeks into this new pattern, I tested him. We'd been playing for hours, trading victories back and forth, and when I won a particularly close match, I stood up quickly, didn't give him time to react. moved toward the kitchen with some excuse about needing water. I made it 3 steps before I heard him behind me, before his hand caught my wrist and held on. "Don't," he said quietly. His voice was rough, strained. "Please." I turned to look at him. He was standing now, too, close enough that I could see the conflict written across his face. The fear and want and confusion all tangled together. His hand was shaking where it held my wrist. "You could just ask me to stay," I said. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could hide behind my usual deflection. "You know," something shifted in his expression. His jaw flexed, that muscle tightening the way it did when he was trying not to show emotion. His thumb moved against my pulse, that familiar circular pattern that I'd grown to crave even when I knew I shouldn't. "Yeah," he said finally, "but you always say yes when I tell you." The admission hung between us, heavy, honest in a way we usually weren't with each other. He was right. I did always say yes. Would have said yes if he'd asked, but he didn't ask. He told. He commanded. He grabbed my wrist and kept me close because asking felt too vulnerable, too much like admitting this mattered. I understood that. Had spent 2 years doing the same thing in different ways, hiding what I felt behind patience and composure and careful control. We were both cowards in our own ways, both too afraid to name what was happening between us. But at least now it was happening. At least we'd moved past pretending this was normal, that friends touched each other like this, that the air between us wasn't charged with everything we weren't saying. I sat back down without him having to ask again. His hand slid from my wrist to my forearm as I moved, maintaining contact, and when I settled onto the couch, he was right beside me, closer than we'd been before, close enough that our thighs touched, that I could feel him breathing. His hand drifted back to my wrist, found that spot over my pulse, and stayed there. He wasn't looking at me anymore, was staring straight ahead at the TV screen like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. I should have said something. Should have asked him what this was, where we were going, what he wanted from me. But I was afraid of the answer. Afraid he didn't know. Afraid he did know, and it wasn't what I hoped for. So I let the silence stretch between us. Let his thumb trace patterns against my skin. Let myself exist in this strange in-between space where we were more than friends, but less than something else, caught in a holding pattern of touch and tension and unspoken longing. And I wonder how long we could stay like this. How many nights we could sit together with his hand on my wrist, both of us pretending this was enough, before one of us broke and demanded more. It took me another week to find the courage to say it out loud. Another week of sitting beside him on that couch, of feeling his hand wrap around my wrist, of pretending I didn't notice the way this had become the only thing that mattered about our nights together. The games were just filler now. Background noise to justify why I kept coming back, why I kept letting him touch me like this, why neither of us ever talked about what any of it meant. But I was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of waiting for him to be brave enough for both of us when I'd never been brave enough for myself. Tired of going home alone and lying in bed, replaying every moment, every touch, torturing myself with questions I was too afraid to ask. We were sitting in our usual positions, his hand on my wrist, his thumb moving in that slow, hypnotic circle that had become as familiar as breathing. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching it. We'd stopped pretending to care about the games an hour ago. "You don't do this with anyone else," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. I've been watching him for months now, paying attention to how he interacted with other people, with his roommate, with the friends who occasionally showed up at his apartment, with everyone else in his life. And he didn't touch them the way he touched me. Didn't grab their wrists and hold on like he was afraid they'd disappear. Didn't look at them with that mixture of fear and longing that I'd learned to recognize in the split second before his fingers made contact with my skin. Jonah went very still beside me. His thumb stopped moving. For a moment I thought he might pull away, might laugh it off and pretend he didn't know what I was talking about, might retreat back behind his walls and leave me exposed, vulnerable, regretting that I'd said anything at all. But he didn't pull away. His hand stayed on my wrist, grip tightening just slightly like he needed to hold on to something solid while he figured out how to respond. "No," he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't." The admission settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I felt my heart rate spike and knew he could feel it too, knew his thumb was resting right over the evidence of what his words did to me. I turned to look at him. He was staring down at where his hand met my skin, jaw tight, that muscle flexing with tension. His other hand was curled into a fist against his thigh, knuckles white. Why, I asked. The word came out rough, demanding in a way I usually wasn't. But I needed to know, needed to hear him say it, whatever it was. Needed something concrete instead of these endless weeks of touches and silence and questions neither of us would answer. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't respond. Then he took a breath, deep and shaky, and when he spoke his voice cracked around the edges. Because I don't want anyone else here. His thumb moved again, pressing harder against my pulse. Just you. The words hit me like a physical force. Just you. Simple and devastating and exactly what I'd been hoping to hear and terrified of hearing in equal measure. Because now it was real. Now we couldn't pretend this was just friendship, just some weird quirk in how we related to each other. Now it meant something. I realized I'd stopped breathing. Made myself inhale, exhale, tried to steady my racing thoughts enough to form a response. But what was I supposed to say to that? How was I supposed to acknowledge this shift without ruining everything, without pushing too hard too fast and watching him retreat? Jonah's hand slid from my wrist to my palm. The movement was slow, deliberate, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. His fingers threaded through mine, and the intimacy of it made my chest tight. We'd never held hands before. In all our years of friendship, all the casual touches and competitive shoves and moments when his hand had lingered on my arm or shoulder, we'd never done this. This felt different, intentional, like he was claiming something, or maybe offering something, and waiting to see if I'd accept. I didn't pull away, couldn't pull away. My fingers curled around his, holding on just as tightly as he was holding on to me. He wasn't trying to win, I realized suddenly. All this time, every game, every challenge, every moment when he grabbed my wrist and told me to stay, he hadn't been trying to beat me or control me or assert dominance in our friendship. He'd been trying to keep me, trying to hold on to something he didn't know how to ask for, trying to make me stay without having to admit how much he needed me to. The revelation shifted something fundamental in how I understood the past few months. Every touch recontextualized. Every moment when I thought he was being competitive or controlling or just typical Jonah, he'd actually been quietly desperate. Afraid I'd leave. Afraid I'd see through him and realize what he wanted and reject him for it. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. And we sat there in the quiet, holding on to each other, neither of us ready to say what came next, but both of us finally being honest about what this was. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Hands intertwined, neither of us speaking. The weight of his admission still hanging in the air between us, settling into something real and undeniable. Just you. The words kept echoing in my head, reshaping everything I thought I understood about us, about what we'd been doing all this time. But understanding what it meant didn't make it easier. Didn't tell me what to do next. We were in new territory now, past all the games and deflections and careful distance we'd maintained. And I didn't know how to navigate it. Didn't know if Jonah knew either, or if we were both just hoping the other person had mapped. Finally, I made myself speak. The words came out steadier than I expected, clearer than I felt. Then stop pretending it's just about the game. Jonah's hand tensed in mine. I felt his whole body go rigid beside me, like I'd said something dangerous, something that couldn't be taken back. Which I had. I'd just drawn a line in the sand, forced us out of the comfortable ambiguity we'd been hiding in. No more pretending we were just friends who touched too much. No more excusing the tension as competition or proximity or anything other than what it actually was. He still wasn't looking at me, was staring straight ahead at the dark TV screen, his jaw working, that muscle flexing over and over. His breathing had gone shallow. I could see his chest rising and falling too quickly, could feel the tremor running through his hand where it gripped mine. I wondered if I'd pushed too hard. If he'd pull away now, laugh it off, tell me I was reading too much into things. If I just destroyed 2 years of friendship because I couldn't keep my mouth shut, couldn't be patient enough to let him come to this in his own time. But then he turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. Fear, raw and unguarded, but underneath it, the same one I've been seeing in fragments for months, always quickly hidden, always denied. Now it was right there on the surface, impossible to miss, impossible to misinterpret. His hand shifted in mine, fingers tightening, and I realized he was shaking. Jonah, who never showed weakness, who turned everything into a joke or a challenge rather than admit vulnerability, was trembling. His eyes flickered between my eyes and my mouth, back and forth, like he was trying to decide something, like he was standing at the edge of a cliff and couldn't tell if jumping would kill him or set him free. I didn't move, didn't push, just waited, heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it, while he fought whatever internal battle was playing out behind his eyes. Then, slowly, so slowly I almost didn't register at first, he leaned forward. His free hand came up to my face, fingers barely grazing my cheek, tentative and questioning, still giving me the chance to pull away, still afraid, even now, that I might reject him. I didn't pull away, leaned into his touch instead, just slightly, just enough to let him know this was okay, this was what I wanted to. Something in his expression shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Relief, maybe, or recognition, like he'd been holding his breath for months and was finally allowing himself to exhale. He closed the distance between us slowly, gave me every opportunity to stop this, to change my mind, to go back to what we were before. But I didn't want to go back. Didn't want to spend another night sitting beside him, wondering what if, torturing myself with possibilities I was too afraid to reach for. Our foreheads met first. The contact was gentle, grounding, intimate in a way that somehow felt more significant than a kiss would have been. I could feel his breath against my lips, warm and unsteady. Could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with laundry detergent, and something uniquely him. His hand on my face trembled. His fingers curled slightly, thumb brushing across my cheekbone with the same careful attention he'd always given to touching my wrist, like I was something precious, something he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to have. Fine, he whispered, his voice cracking around the word. You win. The admission surprised a soft laugh out of me. After everything, after weeks of tension and unspoken longing, and both of us too afraid to name what we wanted, he was still framing it as a competition, still hiding behind that language even as he surrendered to this. Finally, I whispered back, and then he kissed me. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It wasn't the kind of kiss I'd imagined during all those nights lying awake replaying our moments together. It was soft, careful, almost hesitant, like he was still afraid this might not be real, like he was waiting for me to dissolve under his touch and prove this was just another thing he'd imagined. But I kissed him back, let my free hand come up to his neck, fingers sliding into his hair. Held on to him the way he'd been holding on to me all this time, with intention and need and the quiet desperation of someone who'd been waiting too long for this. His hand tightened in mine. His lips moved against mine with increasing certainty, like he was learning the shape of this, learning me, learning how to stop hiding behind competition and actually reach for what he wanted. And it felt less like surrender, more like relief, like we'd both been holding our breath underwater and had finally broken the surface. We still argue, still compete, still turn everything into some challenge that doesn't actually matter, but somehow does anyway. Jonah will never stop needing that edge, that constant push and pull of testing boundaries. And I'll never stop meeting him there, matching his energy with my quiet, stubborn refusal to back down. But something fundamental has shifted in the space between us. Now, when we play games on that navy blue couch, when I win and move to stand with some teasing comment about his declining skills, his hand still finds my wrist. That hasn't changed. I don't think it ever will. It's become his tell, the one gesture that reveals what he won't always say out loud. That he wants me close. That he's not ready for me to leave yet. That proximity matters more than victory. The difference is what happens after. He'll grab my wrist, that familiar firm pressure that still sends electricity up my arm, even now, weeks after everything changed between us. His thumb will find my pulse point with the precision of muscle memory, that slow circular movement that he's perfected over months of practice. But now, instead of just sitting in charged silence while we both pretend this is normal, while we both avoid naming what it means, he pulls me back down beside him, and he kisses me. Sometimes it's gentle, a soft press of lips that feels like punctuation, like he's finishing a sentence we started months ago. Sometimes it's deeper, more insistent, his free hand coming up to cup my face or slide into my hair while I lean into him and let myself get lost in the sensation of finally being allowed to have this. Every single time, it feels like relief. We don't talk about it the way I thought we would. There's no long conversation about what we are, no discussion of labels or definitions or what this means for our friendship. That's not how Jonah operates. He doesn't process things through words. He processes through action, through touch, through showing me what he feels instead of saying it. And I've learned to read him in ways I never could before. Learned that when he grabs my wrist a little tighter, he's had a bad day and needs the grounding. Learned that when his thumb moves faster against my pulse, he's anxious about something he won't name. Learned that when he pulls me close and just holds on without kissing me, he's overwhelmed and needs the quiet comfort of knowing I'm not going anywhere. I'm still patient. Still the one who waits, who thinks before speaking, who measures his responses. But I'm learning to be patient in new ways. Learning to give Jonah the space to figure out how to be vulnerable, how to ask for what he needs instead of just taking it. Learning that sometimes love looks like sitting in silence with his hand wrapped around my wrist, both of us just breathing together, and that's